Hey everyone, today I'm going to build a little armrest table and learn some new woodworking techniques I've wanted to try out. I started out by cutting my boards into 3 parts of 320mm or 12.6 inches. It's funny, watching this now I realize how bowed this board was, which later causes some issues. Taking the board, I cut it down on the table saw. I'm going to be joining these boards together with 45-degree miters. I decided to do this on the table saw, but you could do this with a miter saw. Now, I don't know why at the time I decided it was a good idea to try and run this along the fence, but as you'll see later, this caused some issues. Luckily though, I didn't cause any accidents. This was definitely not a safe way to do this. Do as I say, not as I do. Taking each piece, I routed a small 2mm 45-degree chamfer to all the front and back edges. With that done, I applied some wood glue to one of the side pieces and using 2 right angle clamps, glued all the pieces together.
That's quite big.
As you can see, running the boards along the fence caused the board to be unevenly cut. Not to mention the boards being warped as well has resulted in a huge gap. Using more glue and sawdust, I tried to fill it as best as I could and left it to dry overnight. Luckily, I would get the chance to redo this later. I wanted to make the miters a bit stronger and add a little more detail to what would be a very boring design. I thought about putting screws in them and then covering it with a plug, but I ultimately went with splines. I think either would have looked nice, but I like the splines more because it would be visible from all sides and not just from the top. To cut the gaps for the splines, I could do it by hand with a saw, but I wanted to do it on a table saw with a jig, not because I wanted to redo the jank one I built before, and the jig would make the task easy. I grabbed some scrap pieces from offcuts or old projects that I had been holding. Taking those, I cut a piece in half with a 45-degree angle, giving me 2 pieces with 45s. I luckily already had another 2 pieces that were the same and both already had 45-degree angles on them, so all I needed to do was cut everything to the width I wanted. With 1 base piece, 2 side angle pieces and 2 middle pieces, I began attaching all of them together with lots of wood glue, as this would be what holds everything together. I did drill a few screws into the pieces just to hold everything together while the glue dried. Coming back the next day, it was all dry and I could remove all the screws. Putting that aside for now, I need to create some thin strips that will be my splines for the miters. To do this, I took some leftover walnut that I had and I cut a few thin strips off. They were around 5mm or 1/5 in thickness. If, like me, you don't have a 0 tolerance insert for your table saw, a little trick you can do is drop your blade all the way down and then place tape over the area. Slowly bring up the saw blade while it's running, keeping your hands well away from the blade. Now you have a makeshift 0 tolerance insert that will stop the thin strips from falling in the gaps or getting caught and thrown back at you. Now, if anything, it's good to test the things you're building, and that's just what I did, and boy, did I have a brain malfunction. I had made a crucial measurement error. Somehow, I had mixed up my length measurements of my plants, resulting in the piece being way too big. This was a blessing in disguise though, because it meant I could redo the miters that I'd done, and hopefully redeem myself. I again did the miters on the table saw, but this time with the miter gauge. I think I may have thought that the board wouldn't fit on the table with the gauge, and that's why I tried it the other way, but as you can see, that was a wrong assumption. Then, after triple checking the lengths, I cut them all to the correct measurement. For the second time I glued up the pieces. This time I made it much easier for myself by using some tape to hold the pieces together while I glued everything. Once the glue had dried, I removed the tape and any glue that I had squeezed out. During the process of all this, some of the faces on the boards had gotten a little dinged up, so I wanted to try out something that I'd seen, and that's steaming the area to get the fibers in the board to rise back up. It's actually quite easy to do, and has pretty good results. I ran around the table and marked any areas with dents, then I came back with a spray bottle and applied water to that area. Then after a few seconds, I placed over it a wet cloth, and with a hot iron pushed that down on the area for a few seconds. A wet cloth will generate steam and dry out, and the dents will be almost completely gone. Hopefully this technique comes in handy for you sometime. I can finally get back to where I was, cutting the splines. I start by marking out where they'll be, doing the center of the board and then the center on there on both sides. And with the new spline jig, cutting these was very easy. It's important to remember when doing this not to have the blade too high, or it will come out through the other side of the piece. With the gaps cut, I can now put the splines I cut before into them. Off camera, I cut them in half as I realized I didn't have enough. Oops. I put a small amount of glue into the top of the gaps, then put the splines in. Getting the first few splines in was a bit difficult as it was a bit too tight, but I tapped away at it until it was in place. As for the others, I was able to push them in by hand. I then left them to dry. The next day, the glue dried. With a flush cut saw, I cut off the excess parts of the splines. You can use a plain card like I did to stop the blade from being able to scratch the board. It works nicely, it just needs a little sanding to make it completely flush. Now I can move on to sanding the entire piece. I started off with 80 grit sandpaper, then I did 120 grit. After that, I lightly sprayed water over the table to raise the grain for the final grit 180. And finally for the finish, I applied a coat of Osmo Poly-X, and after an hour I applied the second coat. It was a really hot day so it dried crazy fast. This finish has a nice clear satin look and it's super easy to apply. It's funny how a project you set out thinking would be simple can so easily become a headache. If I had to do this again, I would change the order of things I did, like doing the rounding of the edges after cutting the pieces and before doing the miters, double checking how I'm cutting things and if there's a better way to do it, and not to mention double checking my measurements more often. Besides that, I think the project turned out really well, and I hope you learned something from this. If you would like to make this project for yourself or just want to support me, I have plans available on my Etsy store below. Otherwise, a like and subscribe helps me know that you enjoy this content. If you have any questions, ask them down below and I'll try to get to them. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.